And in the south, British forces now doing limited penetration raids into Bazra against massed assets and, of course, lucrative targets. We were told by CENTCOM this morning that the road north into Baghdad is now open and being used regularly for supply line, and routinely 2,500 or so trucks per day up and down that road. If we go to the next map, we'll talk in and around Baghdad. Of course, the big news, 110 kilometers to the south in Karbala, there was street-to-street fighting between coalition and Fedayeen troops. Baghdad airport is now secured in this region right here and being used to make limited penetration raids at will into the city as necessary by the tactical commander. The big news is that there's 24/7 close air supply now, and that checkpoints, of course, around the city will have to be put up to check the vehicles leaving the city to the north and west as refugees leave the city.
And this huge Republican Guard barracks southwest of Baghdad was surrounded by American tanks and armored personnel carriers. Minutes later, they opened fire. Inside, the soldiers who make up Saddam Hussein's last line of defense suddenly found their headquarters in flames. A fuel unit caught light, and soon much of the barracks had been destroyed. But fighting has been heaviest around the international airport further north. Clearly not under Iraqi control, as they claim today, yet eerily quiet, the crunch of glass underfoot and a hole in the concrete floor, the few hints of fighting here. It still bears the name of the president, but is now renamed simply Baghdad International. But there are other reminders of Saddam's rule in the VIP lounge next door. Gold taps, gold sinks, some of the finest furniture and fitments that money can buy. It seems increasingly unlikely that the man himself will ever use them again. Especially since US Marines are advancing on Baghdad from the east. Early this morning, they rained hundreds of shells on the capital, but not before they themselves had come under fire. The Republican Guard laid numerous traps and ambushes, although the battles have been largely one-sided. At first light, we took to the dusty and deserted streets to survey the damage. We're headed along the banks of the Tigris River, pursuing pockets of resistance involving members of the Republican Guard, and all the time closing in on the capital, Baghdad.
Convoys heading to the front lines. The supply routes are now hundreds of miles long. The pace of the US advance means they're also vulnerable to pockets of Iraqi resistance, bypassed in the charge towards Baghdad. It's the job of British airborne troops to ensure the free flow of ammunition and supplies. To do it, the Paras are getting on helicopters and policing the roads from the air, a routine learned in Northern Ireland, put to good effect in Iraq. It starts with spotting a suspicious vehicle and putting the chopper down on the road. As the platoon fans out, an Arab speaker explains what's happening. Iraqi reaction ranges from bemusement to fear. For families caught up in this war, these are bewildering times. Still, once the search is complete, they are free to go. By protecting the main supply routes, these British troops are ensuring the free flow of weapons and ammunition to the Americans on the front line. It's a task which is becoming increasingly crucial as the battle for Baghdad intensifies. The threat from Iraqi irregulars is real. The British have found hundreds of assault rifles carefully buried, ready for their owners to come back and reclaim once the front line has moved on. The long-term hope here is that once Saddam Hussein is gone, so will his people's will to fight on. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Southern Iraq.
Are as the following. We have destroyed 6 tanks and we have rendered useless another 10 of the enemy tanks, and we have killed 50 of his soldiers. We have shot down 2 Apache helicopters in the village El Ta'mim, nationalization the meaning, At-Ta'mim village, south of Baghdad, near the crossroad of Salman Park and Basmaya district. We have destroyed 3 personal armored carriers and 5 tanks on the outskirts of Baghdad near the highways approaching Baghdad. Those 5 tanks had been destroyed by the Fidaiyin, and also 1 shuffle had been destroyed. Also 2 tanks, not bulldozer, shuffle, yeah, they call it, yeah, excavator, you call it excavator, and also they call it shuffle. Also, 2 tanks had been destroyed and 3 personal armed carriers in Jurf al-Sakhar area, south of Baghdad, by the Al-Quds army. 2 tanks had been
We're going to leave this for now. We'll play the highlights of it.
Strewn across our path, more than 100 mines, anti-tank and anti-personnel. We're not going any further down this route.
Have a look, Buck.
The gunner from our Spartan carefully checks under the lead vehicle to see whether it is already into the minefield. It's not. So the convoy takes a new way into town.
What we're doing is probing forward on one of the roads, one of the main routes which heads towards Bazra. Basically, it's the fringes of Bazra and Abu al-Qasim out to our right there. So basically, it's just probing forward and clearing any positions. Most of these positions have already been hit by artillery. But like I say, it's just a case of going forward and seeing if there's any further enemy.
Local residents are conspicuous largely by their absence. There are some, but only the tiny donkey seems impervious to the scenes of devastation all around. One of the vehicles in our convoy spots an Iraqi tank, abandoned but intact, though not for long. 30mm cannon shells burst into the superstructure, and then a Striker edges into position before lifting its firing platform and unleashing a swing-fire, wire-guided anti-tank missile. In just a few seconds, the tank is no longer a threat.
This area is now secured. I suspect now we'll withdraw from this area, hand over any information we've got to the corsairs behind us, and then they'll act on that. They're the ones who do the destroying.
With Baghdad breached and Basra teetering, the war in Iraq may well be entering its final phase. David Bowden with the Welsh cavalry on the outskirts of Basra.
Iraqi Kurds combine their raw battlefield skills with high-tech American air power, power that will soon be used by these US Special Forces, preparing the ground for a carefully calculated kill. The Kurds and their American allies are gunning for the Iraqi regime in any way they can. Baghdad is 100 miles south of here. This route blocked by Iraqi army soldiers manning this ridgeline. The Iraqi Kurds have been biding their time here, awaiting the US military's next move.
Iraqi or...
Iraqi, no.
Now helping them figure out the lay of the land.
This is soldier Saddam Hussein.
This Kurdish fighter says he knows the terrain like the back of his hand and maps out positions for his American allies with a small mosaic of stones. The sun is setting. There are reports of Iraqi tank movements, and US strike aircraft will be operating in this vicinity shortly. If Special Forces can help locate targets and coordinate with close air support, there'll be bombing runs. These forward air controllers bristle with antennas. They call in America's birds of prey with calm and precision. And the unmistakable trail of a B-52 bomber, armed and ready to strike. Circling warplanes, hunting their quarry. But ground and air find it difficult to get a fix on camouflage-covered targets.
It's just so hazy right now, too.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, that one right there that I'm looking at looks like that's a net over top of that damn thing.
Patience is a virtue sometimes.
If Tom has comms with the birds, just have them do a flyover and see what they think.
The first birds draw a blank, but others are on the way.
About, right now, about 15 minutes. And if that one don't come, another one's coming, and the B-52's on top. Okay.
And this time, their targets are confirmed.
We're cleared hot. Stand by.
Impact 25 seconds. 45 seconds. Russ, take the right one. Right there. Boom.
An F-15 releases a 500-pound bomb on demand.
Yeah.
It's close to the target, but not close enough. It is the end of the day, but the attacks have just begun. The Iraqi lines appear to fire back.
Hey! We saw flashes behind the mountain. You might want to get down.
Orders are obeyed by one and all, until more bombs fall. That flash is the detonation of 7 500-pound bombs dropped from a high-altitude B-52 bomber. That's what they sound like.
Nice.
Nice, that looks good. That looks like it took out
You want to shift it?
again.
Yeah, shift it down.
East.
East. 4 or 5 degrees. I shifted down, right down that line. So this is our next target and that target. Where was target 1 at? Yeah. Oh yeah, that would look good on 1.
And another Iraqi military target goes up in flames. Brent Sadler, CNN, near Kifri, northern Iraq.
Well, I am just watching the tanks roll in now. The tanks are the first Fusiliers. Both B and C squadron are already on their way and we're following them in. They had intelligence overnight which suggested that there's very little reaction to fear now, actually, in Bazra itself. So now my company, the whole of the battle group of the first Fusiliers, are heading in there. They expect to be sleeping tonight in Bazra itself. Obviously, we don't know how much fighting you might have to do on the way in, but they're pretty confident that they'll be in control of the city within the next few hours. And it's an impressive sight to see several hundred tanks rolling on down into Bazra. We've waited 2 weeks now for this to happen, and they finally decided that the conditions are right, the time is right, that they can take on the opposition that they're likely to face, the Fadaim militia and any troops remaining. But as I say, the intelligence we've gathered over the last 24 hours is that many of them are moving, perhaps wary that the regime in Baghdad is now starting to wobble. Black Watch went in last night across what we know as Bridge 3, which is in the southwest of the country, and are holding their position pretty much downtown. There could be groups of militia still hidden away in some of the buildings like the universities. We know that some pieces of armaments were found at one of the airfields within the city itself. Of course, every time they find more weapons, more tanks, they destroy them. But I think it's fair to say they are not expecting to fight their way in. They may have a few pot shots fired at them, but I don't think they're expecting the general population to rise up in any way. We believe that the people of Bazra are waiting for the British troops. They want them there, and the sooner the better. This order this morning came really out of the blue. Everybody had expected it to be another 2 or 3 days, but the conditions seem to be so favourable at the moment that they decided not to wait any longer. So we're moving in, and that big push has finally arrived.
Morning in central Baghdad, and these volunteers say they're ready to repel American invaders. Despite another night of heavy bombing, there's an air of normality in this district as families venture out to buy food at the local market. Iraqi television again showed pictures of Saddam Hussein meeting his generals, but there's no indication of when the pictures were taken. The Iraqi regime also announced a curfew prohibiting anyone from being on the streets at night to prevent them fleeing the city. Despite Iraqi denials, American forces are now in complete control of Baghdad's airport. They've even taken over Saddam's personal lounge, complete with gold-plated sinks and other ornate furnishings. American forces say they've completely surrounded Baghdad, but they're still facing pockets of resistance in the south, where Iraqi gunmen are disrupting supply routes in the town of Kabbalah. Air support was called in to take out one truck dug in at the edge of a football pitch. As troops entered the town, they were cheered by a small crowd. Harry Smith, ITV News.
Officials here, 7th Cavalry, that the town of Baghdad, the Iraqi capital, is, quote, completely encircled. The United States Army and U.S. Marines control every highway into and out of the city now. And one senior officer said to us, if you want to stay alive, stay off those highways. Now, we were also told that earlier in the day, the 2nd Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division conducted yet another foray into downtown Baghdad, into the city limits. Again, this was essentially just muscle flexing to remind everyone that the United States Army can operate at will whenever it wishes in the Iraqi capital. That unit has since withdrawn. Meanwhile, the 7th Cavalry, which I'm traveling with, has been under pretty consistent fire again today, especially last night. The Iraqis are using guerrilla tactics. These are Fedayeen troops, some of Saddam Hussein's most fanatic fighters. What we have been told is that there has now been contact with the civilian population, Iraqi civilians, in the theater in which we're operating in southwestern Baghdad. And the Iraqi civilians are now saying that it is Saddam's Fedayeen troops who are taking refuge in schools during the day, hiding in schools during the day, knowing the Americans will not strike a school.
The defenders of Baghdad are in the mood to celebrate. This is why American armour fit only for the scrap heap now. We're standing now firmly within the city limits of Baghdad. This is the Al-Dura suburb, and behind me you can see the highway straight to the heart of the Iraqi capital. This, say the Iraqis, is an American tank they destroyed over the past 24 hours. If I just move this gentleman aside, you will see it says Kahone on the barrel of this tank. How is it destroyed? Well, they haven't told us, but there is a large hole just down here. It looks like a landmine strike, and that means that the Iraqis were waiting for the Americans to come up that road. We can now hear the sound of airstrikes just over there, maybe a mile away, a couple of miles at the most, and there is a sound of an aeroplane flying overhead. This, of course, is just one tank. The Iraqis say they destroyed 8 others. We haven't seen the other 8. But already this one tank is playing a central role for the Iraqi authorities in the propaganda war. The sound of another jet very close sends us running for safety. Maybe the Americans had to abandon this tank and destroyed it from the air. It's impossible to know. But this fight is in no doubt. We destroyed it and many others, he says. So for the time being, at least, the images the Iraqi people see of this war are those of victory. Paul Wood, BBC News, in the Al-Dura suburb of Baghdad.
Gradually attempting to occupy it, or simply still probing its defences?
There isn't that steady move through the suburbs yet. What we have is a massing of forces on the southern outskirts of Baghdad. It is not even an encirclement, because I don't believe they have the forces to do it. And indeed, we hear from outside Iraq that a deliberate part of the strategy might be to leave the northeastern part of this city open to allow civilians to flee if it comes to street fighting. And I've been in the northern suburbs. I can't see anything of either forces. We had yesterday, there is no doubt about it, a probing attack from the Americans. It was said at first they came into the heart of the city. I think that was never true. We are now waiting, I think, for further probing attacks, because driving around this city today, we certainly saw no evidence of further incursions by American troops. But that is what people are now bracing themselves for. They are going home, literally shutting the doors, hiding in their homes, waiting to see what move the Americans make next.
And is there any evidence of anyone from the Saddam Hussein regime being in control in Baghdad?
Very difficult to say, once again, Peter, because we see these videos coming out purportedly of President Saddam Hussein, and certainly Iraqis that I watch the television with say, yes, that's our president. We haven't seen the absolute inner circle. These are people related to him by blood, chiefly, of course, his two sons, people from Tikrit, which is his birthplace and his power base. We do still, though, see on a daily basis Iraqi cabinet ministers, and I met the information minister again today in a news conference, giving extraordinary performances of confidence and bravado, given that the Americans are so close. And the Iraqis are saying, in their version of events, we're winning. They claim to have the airport, even though we've seen pictures out of the airport. They claim to be pushing back coalition forces. So to go back to your original question, there is no sense yet of it crumbling. There is still a sense of the leadership being in control, but the Americans will start to push, and then we perhaps will see things develop as the Americans start to move in, as they have promised to do, very, very soon.
Along a road, the road to Dibajan, which is about 20 miles southeast of Mosul, which had just been captured by the Kurdish forces. And as we were driving along, we were overtaken by a convoy which contained American special forces and Kurdish special forces, including the brother of the president, the Kurdish president, Mr. Barzani. And they overtook us, they stopped at the crossroads, we stopped there also with them. We got out of our cars. Then the officer in charge of the American Special Forces saw an Iraqi tank in the plain about a mile away from us, and it was, I think, firing in our direction, or in our general direction. And he called in an airstrike to deal with the tank. What happened next was that I saw two, I think, F-15 American planes circling quite low overhead, and I had a bad feeling about it because they seemed to be closer to us than they were to the tank. And as I was looking at them, this must sound extraordinary, but I promise you it's true. I saw, well, first of all, I saw the bomb coming out of one of the planes, just one bomb, and then extraordinarily, I saw it as it came down beside me. It was painted white and red, and it crashed into the ground about 10-12 meters from where I was standing, and it took the lower legs off Kamran, our translator. I got shrapnel in parts of my body. I got a chunk of shrapnel, would have had it in my spine had I not been wearing a flak jacket, and it was buried deep in the Kevlar. When I looked at it, I was just thrown to the ground. I didn't know what had caused that. I thought I must have tripped. Our producer had a piece of shrapnel an inch long taken out of his foot. But otherwise, apart from ruptured eardrums, which is painful but not serious, and a few punctures from shrapnel, I think we all had shrapnel wounds, all of us the rest of us were all right, but our translator was killed, and he was a fine man.
On the western outskirts of Baghdad, and I can tell you that on the main highway into town today, units of the American 3rd Infantry Division pushed into town. There has been, and there continues to be, a very, very heavy firefight. The column I was traveling in, we took incoming fire from Iraqi positions. We then saw the evidence of a fierce firefight with probably 10 Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers burning. Earlier in the day, we counted probably 20 to 30 of those tanks elsewhere that had been destroyed recently.